The world's nuclear fault lines are cracking open again, with Russia firing a sharp warning shot at Washington's push for fresh arms control talks. Moscow says it will not enter any new nuclear negotiations with the United States unless other nuclear-armed Western powers, France and UK, are brought to the table. The demand comes as the US urges a new three-way nuclear framework involving Russia and China after the collapse of the last remaining treaty limiting the world's largest arsenals. Speaking at the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, Russia's ambassador Gennady Gatilov made Moscow's position crystal clear. Russia, he said, would only participate in a new negotiating process if the United Kingdom and France are included. Both countries, Gatilov stressed, are close military allies of the United States and members of NATO, an alliance that openly describes itself as a nuclear bloc. For Moscow, excluding London and Paris while pressing Russia and China to accept new limits is unacceptable and unbalanced. Washington, however, is pushing hard for a broader reset. The United States has called for three-way talks with Russia and China to craft a new nuclear arms architecture, arguing that the old framework no longer reflects modern threats.
I'm here to tell you that President Trump wants to find a better agreement. Even if we could have legally extended the treaty, it would not have been beneficial for the United States or the world to do so. New START was signed in 2010, and its limits on warheads and launchers are no longer relevant in 2026, when one nuclear power is expanding its arsenal at a scale and pace not seen in over half a century, and another continues to maintain and develop a vast range of nuclear systems unconstrained by New START's terms. An arms control architecture designed nearly 2 decades ago for New START does not allow the United States to credibly uphold both our strategic deterrence commitments to the American people and our extended deterrence commitments to our allies. President Trump has been clear. The power of nuclear weapons is too immense and the cost of their use too great, and he has repeatedly expressed his desire to see a world with fewer nuclear weapons. Today, I can reveal that the U.S. government is aware that China has conducted nuclear explosive tests, including preparing for tests with designated yields in the hundreds of tons. The PLA sought to conceal testing by obfuscating the nuclear explosions because it recognized these tests violate test ban commitments. China has used decoupling, a method to decrease the effectiveness of seismic monitoring to hide their activities from the world. China conducted one such yield-producing nuclear test on June 22nd of 2020. This confluence of factors, serial Russian violations, growth of worldwide stockpiles, and flaws in New START's design and implementation gives the United States a clear imperative to call for a new architecture that addresses the threats of today, not those of a bygone era.
Addressing the same Geneva forum, U.S. Undersecretary of State for Arms Control Thomas DiNanno said repeated Russian violations, the expansion of global nuclear stockpiles, and flaws in the New START treaty left Washington with no choice but to demand a new system. According to the U.S., the next era of arms control must deal with today's dangers, not the realities of a bygone Cold War world. China, Washington warned, sits entirely outside any binding limits. DiNanno said Beijing's nuclear arsenal currently has no caps, no transparency, no declarations, and no controls. He insisted that any meaningful future agreement must include more than just Moscow. For the U.S., arms control without China at the negotiating table is no longer viable. Behind this diplomatic standoff lies the collapse of New START, the last remaining nuclear arms control treaty between the US and Russia. The agreement expired this week, formally ending all legally binding limits on the world's two largest nuclear arsenals. Its expiration has reignited fears of a new global arms race, with no guardrails left to prevent rapid expansion or deployment of nuclear weapons.
Donald Trump stated on his social media platform X that he's firmly opposed to President Putin's recent proposal to prolong the existing limitations of the New START nuclear arms control treaty. Meanwhile, Axios reported yesterday that Russia and the United States were holding negotiations regarding the extension of the treaty's provisions and had tentatively reached an agreement for a period of 6 months. So what exactly is the reality of the situation in this particular instance? Are the provisions of New START being extended, or as President Trump stated in his writing, are they not?
Certainly the existing provisions can be formally prolonged in some manner. Any informal extensions in this particular field are truly difficult to imagine. However, there is a clear understanding, there is a mutual understanding, and this was indeed part of the discussion that took place in Abu Dhabi, regarding the fact that both of the parties involved will be taking up very responsible positions, and both of these sides fully recognize the urgent necessity of initiating the negotiations on this particular matter as soon as it is possible to do so.
How does the Kremlin assess the current situation in Iran and its surroundings today? And secondly, what are the Kremlin's expectations from today's talks in Amman on the Iranian nuclear program? Thank you.
We welcome the negotiations that have now begun in Amman, and we hope these negotiations will be productive and that they will lead to a de-escalation of tensions in the region. Until this happens, of course, we would like to see restraint from all interested states.
Despite the sharp rhetoric, the Kremlin signaled that dialogue is not dead. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Russia and the United States agree on the need to restart nuclear talks. He revealed that the issue was discussed during recent high-level military contacts in Abu Dhabi, talks aimed at easing tensions linked to the war in Ukraine. According to Peskov, both sides recognize the need to act responsibly and begin negotiations as soon as possible. But the conditions are clear. Russia wants parity, not pressure. It argues that if Washington expects Moscow to negotiate under new terms, then all NATO-linked nuclear powers must be included. The US, meanwhile, insists the future of arms control must expand beyond old bilateral models and confront the rise of new nuclear players.
In principle, and from the long-term perspective of maintaining global strategic stability, China urges the United States to resume its strategic stability dialogue with Russia. This is to discuss the follow-up arrangements for the expiration of the New START treaty between the US and Russia, which is also the common expectation of the international community.
Yesterday, Vice Foreign Minister Miao Deyu and Assistant Minister Liu Bing of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs separately met with the visiting Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Garibabadi. The Chinese side has already released relevant information, which you may consult.
The Chinese side has consistently been in communication with all relevant parties regarding these matters and hopes that all sides can resolve their differences through constructive dialogue to jointly safeguard the peace and stability of the region.
China has repeatedly stated its position on China-Lithuania relations.
The Chinese side's door for communication with Lithuania has always remained wide open. We sincerely hope that Lithuania will transform its stated willingness to improve bilateral relations into tangible and concrete actions, promptly rectify its past errors and missteps, returning to the correct and established path of strictly upholding the fundamental One China principle, thereby creating the necessary and favorable conditions for the full normalization of China-Lithuania relations.
The elections in Japan are an internal matter. I have no comment. Regarding the phone call between the Chinese and US leaders, we have already released the news.
The Chinese side has previously clarified its position on the Panama port issue multiple times. Our position is clear. Regarding the specific situation you asked about, please consult the competent Chinese authorities.
Meanwhile, China on Friday urged the United States to restart nuclear talks with Russia after President Donald Trump signaled he wants a brand new arms control deal instead of extending the now expired New START. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Jian said Washington should resume strategic stability dialogue with Moscow and work out post-treaty arrangements, calling it a demand shared by the wider international community. New START, signed in 2010 by then U.S. President Barack Obama and Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, was the only pact limiting deployed nuclear warheads between the world's two largest nuclear powers. The treaty expired on February 5, 2026. Trump has said he wants a new, improved, and modernized agreement fit for future challenges, though Washington has yet to spell out what such a framework would look like. Russia has expressed regret over the treaty's lapse, but insists it will behave as a responsible nuclear power, noting President Vladimir Putin had offered to stick to New START limits for another year if the U.S. agreed, an offer Moscow says went unanswered. Even as the treaty has lapsed, the U.S. and Russia have agreed to restart high-level military contact following talks in Abu Dhabi, reopening a channel that had been frozen since 2021. Lin also weighed in on China's strained ties with Lithuania after Prime Minister Ingrida Ruginiene admitted allowing a Taiwanese representative office in Vilnius in 2021 was a strategic mistake. Lin said China remains open to dialogue, but expects Lithuania to correct its course, adhere to the One China principle, and take concrete steps towards normalizing relations. As the last treaty fades into history, the world now stands at a dangerous crossroads, with nuclear diplomacy restarting not with compromise, but with competing red lines, hardened positions, and the shadow of an unrestrained arms race looming large.